Greetings, it's Hugh Ballou. Another episode of the Nonprofit Exchange Live. It's Hugh Ballou and Russell Dennis. Russell, how are you doing today out there in beautiful Colorado?
After snowfall last night, the sun has come back out. Everything is beautiful out here in Colorado.
Love it. People on the podcast can't see it, but you got a shiny head. Is that part of the sun or just the light over your head?
Well, you know, all of this glare helps keep the focus off of the shadow here with all of the gray hair in it. So there's a method to my madness shining the light.
I see that. Russell, the real person. So Russell, we have a guest who's also a resident of Colorado, but he's a new resident of Florida. And we're going to hear from him in just a minute. Today's topic is protecting your culture by doing effective vetting of the people you're bringing in, either volunteers or paid staff. So, Steve Durie, welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange.
Thank you, Hugh. It's great to be here.
It is so good to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, some background, and how did you arrive at what you're doing now, and why is it important to you?
Well, I've been doing this for 15 years, but where it started was when I was actually volunteering in youth organizations with my kids. And my question was, aren't you going to run a background check on me? And they're like, no, we don't do that. We trust everybody. And previous to that, I had a lot of database experience in a consulting company in consulting on justice projects, and that is how to share criminal data. So I took that knowledge about sharing criminal data and my passion for keeping my own kids safe and those that I was going to be working with as a volunteer, and really just turned it into a business 15 years ago. So, and currently, my kids are a little older now, and my wife Laura and I have a special needs son. He's an adult, he's 31, but he also is extremely vulnerable and needs protection. He doesn't live at home anymore, and that's a constant worry about Tommy, is whether the people that are working alongside Tommy are safe. So it does transcend, not with just our children and our youth, but it really transcends into any vulnerable population. And that is really a broad brushstroke, is anybody who is vulnerable, and then we can kind of look at each group individually as to how to best screen someone and check them out if they're working with children, youth, or vulnerable adults, or elderly, or single people. There's a lot of different vulnerable populations that maybe we're not thinking about right away.
Well, absolutely. And it's really good to know about people. And in the work that Russell and I do through Center Vision, we help people build their strategy out, and part of that is the competencies. And we've created a new paradigm to replace the job description. We call it a position description. And the first of four pillars of that is the competency. And when you look at somebody's competency, you also want to do a background check so that you can validate what's on their resume. Did they actually do that? And are there some hidden things in there? So finding out about the people, and then what's their performance going to be, role and responsibility, and if it's financial, then what is another level of compliance? Right. I used to live in a town of 30,000, and one year there were two nonprofits that had treasurers make away with $750,000, trusted friends and community members, and they didn't do an adequate background check or have safeguards in place. And the third pillar is the culture fit. And if somebody's got a history of conflict or got a history of abuse, you don't really want them spoiling your culture. And then there's a fourth pillar of expectations, but the vetting the person, their competency, but are they also clean, and do they really fit the culture? So there's lots of reasons in any kind of enterprise to do the background check. I think it's especially important when we're dealing with people that are compromised, like your son, like children, like older adults. There's lots of opportunities for people to abuse the system. So to date, how many you've worked with nonprofits so far, have you?
Our focus of the company Secure Search is actually with the nonprofit community. So in over 15 years, we have served over 10,000 nonprofits as their partner for screening their staff, their volunteers, their board of directors. So we actually are a full service company, and we can do anything. So from resume verification to child abuse awareness training for those that work with children.
So resume verification. Yeah, I heard a guy one time and resume said he went to Yale and studied finance, and I found out later he didn't graduate. There's people that make up things on their resume, so that's a new piece of data. So are nonprofits any more vulnerable than for-profits? Is there an attitude of difference there? Like you told the story about you being a volunteer, and you ask about the background check, and they say, "Oh, we trust people." Do you find that to be more common than not?
I actually find that to be pretty common in the nonprofit culture, where they actually are really hungry for people to serve and to help. And with that, sometimes they actually push aside the fact that these people may have a nefarious past. So they're looking to either quickly onboard them, get them into a position. They're happy to have a warm body. They're happy to have the skill set that the individual brings to the table. They were referred by a close friend, referred by a family member. So a lot of times they're not even thinking about screening them, especially if they're not working directly with a child. I think when they're working directly with a child, it's more in our consciousness that, maybe we've got to make sure we put the best people with these kids to keep them safe. But what about people who are just working alongside one another? With the workplace violence concept, we really need to focus on making all of our communities and all of the workplaces as safe as possible. And it's the responsibility of the organization to do so. But nonprofits, because of their compromised budgets in some cases, they are spending their money elsewhere to maybe to grow their projects, and they're not really thinking about the people. Are they safe in the environment they're working in? So I do believe that in corporate America it is common, and in the nonprofit arena it's not as common. So we're here as a voice to raise the awareness that really everybody should be doing this, whether you have one employee or you have thousands.
Now, you and I met at a conference last week, CEO Space, and had I met you and asked if I'd been there, I came in late in the week because I had conflicts. But if I had met you and said, "Hey, Steve, what is it you do?" And you say, "I do background searches," and I say, "Oh, I have a nonprofit. Why is it important for me to do that?" How would you respond to me?
As a nonprofit?
Yeah, I said, if I say I have a nonprofit, and why is it important for me to do that?
Well, nonprofits really have to, and you kind of touched on this, and it's really about reducing risk and reducing liability. So liability is big. It all kind of ties into the total and overall image in the community they're serving. So it's protecting their image, number one. It doesn't have to be the first priority. First priority is protecting those that are part of your organization. So to make sure you do that, you have to kind of look at the entire hierarchy of your staff, from your board of directors on down to your volunteers. And a lot of times there's people in between the upper board and the volunteers that are just coming on that get missed. And they're not screened because they just didn't think it was important to screen them. But really, it's about lowering your liability and lowering your risk, or at least managing your risk. You can't be a risk-free organization. That just doesn't exist. So really, it's about how do you take steps and utilize your budget dollars to minimize your risk as much as you possibly can.
Russell, you and I interface with a lot of nonprofit leaders and boards. Mm-hmm. And I find that there's a lot of boards that aren't up to speed on how to be the board. And they think about being in charge of governance sometimes. They sometimes realize they're responsible for financial oversight. I don't think boards realize that they have a liability in whatever happens. And so do you find, Russell, in your work, that you find boards that are blind to this element as well?
I've talked to people that really don't even have a full grasp of the notion of having a liability insurance for their board members, directors, officers, as they're putting these things together. don't understand how critical that is and what risks are involved. And so a large part of the problem is that people don't know what they don't know. And nonprofit leaders, these are people centered in the idea of making the world a better place and service to others. And they're more prone to take people at their word as opposed to doing any sort of digging. And they may not feel that there's a big risk associated to bringing the person on. And it's nice to be able to take people at their word, but it really depends on the kind of work you're doing, who you're serving, how much the population you're serving needs to be protected. You're protecting the assets of the organization. It just never occurs to people that there may be a scurvy elephant roaming around in the zoo. You've got to really have a look at who you're dealing with. People aren't always who they say they are, and that's just the reality of it. So it's important to look at these things up front, because if you don't have a person who's not in integrity in there in the first place, you don't have to figure out how to get rid of him or her later on, when you could have problems and the reputation of your organization could be at stake. You just have these horror stories like the veterans. I'm trying to think of the veterans organization a few years ago that saw their reputation fall apart because the CEO was playing games with the books. So always you got to think in terms of protecting yourself with your regulations, with internal controls, with the way that money and other assets are handled, and more importantly, how you deal with the people you serve. You can really get in a lot of trouble easily and quickly without in the least bit intending to.
So Steve, did that shake loose any thoughts for you?
Yeah, it actually did. I do believe that nonprofits kind of feel that the people that they bring in have the heart for what they do. And so if they have a heart for what they do, then they're probably good people. And I really think that's a mistake that a lot of them make, is just taking that assumption that because you say you believe in what we believe in, and when you have the passion for what we have a passion for, doesn't mean that they have the same background that you have. And a lot of people are trying to use their influence that they currently have in the community. It could be a bank president stamp or whatever it might be, a leader in the community, to find their way into a vulnerable group. That is actually the MO of a pedophile, is to build up trust in everybody around them, including even building themselves up to be leaders in their community, so that almost everybody seems to trust them. And that's when they can get to the vulnerable children and build relationships without anybody thinking twice about it. So screening, it's not going to catch everybody, only if they've been arrested or convicted of something in the past. So it's only one part of the puzzle for keeping not only your organization safe, but those that you serve. It goes much more beyond the background check. And I don't think that anyone can feel, hey, I got that warm and fuzzy feeling now that I implemented background checks and I'm good. I got a green check mark for that person. I can just let them go. And that's a wrong approach. You really need to have a conscious community around, that everybody is the eyes and ears of the organization. And we all have to keep our eyes on who we're working alongside. And if they are doing something that we believe is either incorrect or is harmful to the organization or to those you serve, to make sure that we all feel empowered to report those things, especially if it is abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, whatever you might see. It's really up to us to report it. Wow.
So there's a whole nother realm that Russell talked about with having your policies and procedures up to date, but you just pointed out we got to pay attention. That's part of our responsibility as a leader, to see what's in front of us. And I never realized that people who are, and it makes sense as you talk about it, somebody that's a pedophile positions themselves and a place of trust, and then continues to validate that. So they throw people off guard. No, it couldn't possibly be true. You know, I've known people in that position before, and they were busted. Eventually you get caught, but how long does it take, and how many people do you hurt in the process? So I guess the due diligence on the front part is to at least do your background check, which also helps relieve your liability. And I'm sure some of the companies that Russell talked about that issue board insurance require a background check, so they have less liability. But before, I didn't warn you that when Russell comes in, he has the hard questions. So I'll ask you a couple of easier ones first while he's formulating his really hard questions. But tell us, give us some examples where people were trusting and it really created damage, and then you came in and helped them. Maybe you didn't, but maybe you helped them get a process in place to prevent it in the future. What are some of the things, without naming names, some of the kinds of things besides what you just talked about that people should be alert to?
Well, there's so many stories. Some that have been recently in the news that everybody's aware of is like USA Gymnastics and Dr. Nasser, building trust not only from the organization with the parents of these young children in the gymnastics program, and then going on to abuse them for years without ever getting caught. Sandusky at Penn State, the same thing, where he was able to justify to his peers that showering with young boys was just to teach them cleanliness. So they're always going to try to, lie about who they are and have somebody to believe it. And they're masters at it. And they never take any responsibility for their actions. It's that narcissistic behavior on the pedophile side. But another story, this has nothing to do with a criminal record, but this was a nonprofit organization that had drivers and they were doing deliveries. And one of the individuals, when we met with them, and we were on site for this one, he was in the state of Colorado, but he had a Tennessee driver's license. And I said, "How long have you been in Colorado?" And he said, "I've been here for 4 years." And I said, "Well, why don't you have a Colorado driver's license?" He says, "Because I lost my license in Colorado from too many speeding tickets. So I had to go to my parents' house in Tennessee to get a license." And he's actually volunteering for an organization to drive one of their vehicles. So people can kind of get around and get from their past and get away from their past, whether it's criminal behavior or not. It may not be the case. It could be resume fudging, and that happens more than you know, especially for certain positions, executive director positions, finance positions, COO type of positions, where they can say they have a master's degree in finance and they really just have a bachelor's, or they don't even never finish college. But they put it on their resume. They've had it on their resume for years and nobody questioned it. There are stories where the CEO of Radio Shack, I know that Radio Shack's kind of falling from grace, but the CEO from Radio Shack never had his master's degree in business, never had his MBA. And it was a reporter that figured it out and started reporting on it, and then he resigned or got let go. The same thing with the president of the business school of Harvard had miscommunicated on her resume that she had a PhD, and she never did. So really, organizations that we've all know about and have heard about, down to around the corner, the businesses in your neighborhood, and possibly even your own organization. So it's really important to vet the higher end positions in your organization. It's not just about the volunteers. I can, of course, go on forever about the volunteers and why that's very important. But really, anybody working in your office, your finance, making sure you're looking at embezzlement, money laundering, anything that might pertain with your budget, your finance, your books, making sure that those are always intact and that you're bringing on the best people. And again, background checks don't always catch somebody. They may never have been arrested before. And I'm going to go back to what Hugh was talking about the pedophile. And he had to mention that eventually they get caught. And actually that's not true. Oh. Eventually they never get caught and they die with their secrets. And the average pedophile molests 137 children in their lifetime without ever getting arrested for it. So that's where the training is more important than the background check, and being aware and keeping our eyes open. So,
wow. And I guess there's some people that want to be polite and they think it's not polite to do the background check. Have you run across that, and how do you respond to that?
I have for the last 15 years. We hear that. I don't know exactly where that really stems from, other than they feel like it's unkind to ask someone to sign a consent form to do a background check. They're giving of their time, and I feel like I'm invading their privacy if I ask them for this information. But you have to think about your organization and its reputation and why you have that organization set up in the first place. And then you have to make sure you bring on the best people. And I think you just need to frame it differently, that we are a culture of safety instead of just being haphazard about who we bring on. I think that everybody who comes on board would feel more confident with the person they're sitting next to, the person they're workshop with the person that they're running an errand with to Office Depot. If they're going in the same vehicle together, you're going to just have a higher level of confidence that the organization did the right thing before you came to either work there or volunteer there.
So there's the person that says, oh, I don't want to be impolite to them, so they kind of back down from it, not realizing that they're being impolite to everybody else in the culture. I don't want to make trouble. Well, they're making trouble for everybody else if they don't do that. How about the person that says, I don't have time for that? That sounds like too much trouble.
Well, the one issue with nonprofits is wearing so many hats and being so busy. And I think that sometimes the background check seems like a daunting task, especially if they've never done them at all. They're like, wow, I have to vet a company. I don't know where to go to trust somebody. I don't want to do all the paperwork. I have enough things going on. Really, I don't even know if I don't even understand background checks. So how am I going to do this? I don't have a human resource background. I don't even have a human resource director on staff. And that's where actually Secure Search, my company, actually makes it a little unique, because we can come in understanding that is one of your pain points of not having enough people to do all of the tasks you have to do. So we actually made everything paperless. So not only the consent forms, but the entire process of signing up, everything is paperless. Everything is just a click of a button. And the applicants, whether they be your board of directors, your staff, or your volunteers, they actually do all of the data entry. So all you're doing is sending an email invitation. Simple as that.
Wow. So if I came to you and said I have 10 volunteers and I need to take them through a background check, then you'd give me a consent form for them to sign. So you had basically the permission to do that.
Well, the way you phrased that was interesting, that I give them a consent form. It's actually against the law for us to provide template consent forms. We provide samples. And all consent forms are the organization's forms. That is not my form.
Okay.
So we provide a sample, but it is really up to each organization to go through legal counsel and make sure that everything is in there that they need to be in there and that it meets their federal and their state laws. Now, we try to do our best with our samples to make sure they're good, but you should only use that as kind of a framework.
So before you can do the background check, I have to have done that, have them sign a form, though.
Yes. And that form can be in paper, or it can be through our paperless volunteer and applicant portal that we have called Search My Background. So everything's in the portal electronically, and they actually sign a signature box either with their finger on a mobile device or their mouse or their computer, and that signature will map to all of the documents within the system so that everything is signed and everything is provided to the applicant.
So where I was headed with that, and I thank you for the clarification on the language, where I was headed with that, I would say I've got my 10 volunteers and I need to run them through the process. Would you suggest to me that I do it on myself as well?
Well, somebody should run it on you. But if you want to at least have something in the quote unquote file, whether it be a digital file or a file folder in a lockable filing cabinet, having your own in there is a good idea, especially to report to the board that if you're the executive director, it started with me. Now you're running your own. Sometimes you're going to be surprised with what you might even see on your own. We had an executive director in Minnesota who was a small nonprofit. And really, I think it was like 5 or 10 different volunteers based on what he told me over the phone. This was quite a few years ago when it was small enough and I was able to see the background checks coming in on a regular basis. And I just pulled it open. I'm like, oh, I talked to that gentleman on the phone, signed up and ran his background check. He had 3 pages of felonies on his own. He never ran another background check with us. I think he was just really curious whether his own background check would come up and expose him. So I had a fiduciary responsibility to him as a customer, so there was nothing really I could do to share with the greater group of that organization. But there's a lot of risk out there, a lot of risk, and it can be, like I just said, it can be with that executive director. And I don't think the executive director should be the one running the background check. It should be pushed by the board that the executive director have a background check done.
Absolutely. So nobody should be exempt from it. Everybody should go through the founder, the executive director.
Everybody.
Yeah, great. We're almost halfway through this interview, and Russell, I'm sure that you have formulated a great question for our guest.
Well, as I was saying earlier, a lot of people don't know what they don't know. So I think it sort of starts out with going from a place of what do I know? What have I been told? What don't I know? And where did the information that I get, how do I know what I know? What have they told me or where have they pointed me to? So I think my first question would be, where do you get the quality information? How can you get quality information to make sure that what you're hearing can be verified independently?
That's a really good question, Russell, because there are a lot of background screening companies in the U.S., thousands really, and everybody approaches business differently. Some are very small, working, that concept of working out of your garage, and you would know it because they have a beautiful website. But they also might be in it just for the profit. And there's lots of different data points to really put together a good background check. The problem I see with the nonprofit side is they're leaning on these database products to be the end-all be-all product because it's fast and it's inexpensive. And they think because somebody might be calling it a national search that it truly is, but it isn't. It's really... I like to think about the database searches as a net, and you're casting it across. If you can picture them, I have a map behind me. You picture the map of the United States, and now you're casting this net across the United States. What is a net made up of? Holes strung together isn't the way I like to put it. So I want you to remember that though that may say national, we call it multi-state, there are going to be holes. And in some areas of this net, there are going to be tears, and there are going to be huge holes versus very tightly knit holes in some other areas. So you have this product that a lot of the nonprofits like to order because they think it's a national product. They think it's an easy, inexpensive way to launch into the background checks, and they don't realize the risks that are still going to be there, but not really conducting what we call the best-in-class background check. And so nonprofits have to be careful. But to answer your question about data, we actually take 3 different aggregation data points for the database, and we merge them together, and then we eliminate the duplicates. A lot of other companies, they'll buy data from one of these aggregators of data, and they'll hang it on their own internal servers and ping against that data for months before they refresh it. That's how you get the $2, $3 background checks for some of these large nonprofits. Not saying that everybody does it that way, but in order to reduce the cost to try to meet what an expectation might be from a nonprofit, which is cheap and low priced, these organizations are going to give you really bad and old data. We have very refreshed data. We refresh our data every week, in some cases for the sex offender registries, every 2 weeks for some. but the oldest refresh we have is every 30 days for our entire data. And again, it's a merge of 3 different data points coming together. We didn't get into this business primarily to make a profit. We got into this business to protect those that need to be protected.
And that's it. I mean, it's setting that intention right up front. And I think that when you're talking to people, you have to set an intention right up front about what it is that you're doing. And when you talk to people who might be new, yeah, we need the help, but understand that we are going to be looking into some things. We're going to be asking you things for the sake of transparency, and we're going to be direct about it. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. And we keep our questions as open in that way as we can so that we get some meaningful information, you know. And I think that people that have things to hide or may balk a little bit at this direct. And, you know, if somebody's fidgeting and they don't, they're talking about how much time this is taking, you know, why do you need to know that? In my head, that would be a red flag. What say you?
Yeah, a hidden benefit of the background check implementation is the bad ones kind of leave in the guise of night, and they just don't come back tomorrow. Because you actually said, hey, we take it seriously. We're going to have a consent form. We're going to have you sign this consent form. We're going to call your references. We're going to actually check in on who you say you are. And that's another thing is references. If you're not calling references, whether you outsource it to an organization, or I recommend doing it internally so you can hear the nuance over the phone. You can hear the pregnant pauses of someone. If you said, is this person somebody that you would bring back into your organization if you could? And they went, well, I don't know about that. It's kind of hard for someone who you outsourced that to actually put that into words on a report. So I recommend if you have the time to definitely do it yourself. If you have the money, you can outsource it. But references are just as important as the quote-unquote background check. And the background checks, of course, can be criminal. They can verify your resume, your education, your employment. It's not always just looking at their criminal records, but making sure they are who they say they are.
While you're on that track, what kinds of background checks are there? Go over that again. And
yeah, there are lots of different types of background checks. We want to get the nonprofit organizations to stop thinking about using just the database for looking for a criminal or a sex offender. Because of the analogy that I used of the fishing net with all the larger holes and tears, you really need to take a look at each applicant holistically. Instead of where your organization is serving or based, in the geography and how that might look in a database search, you really need to look at the applicant, because you got John and Mary that, you know, John could be a resident of one place for his whole life, and Mary has lived in 7 different places in the past 7 years. And so Mary, you're going to have to do a little bit more on, because there's possibilities that the database has completely missed where Mary lived. The databases weren't up to date where Mary lived. And you're going to have to add a county courthouse search or a statewide repository search if it exists, like it does in the state of Colorado, Russell, and other states have that. You're going to need to start with a foundation and then layer additional due diligence on top of that to get a really good profile for each applicant instead of one size fits all. But the criminal side, you're breaking out into 2 different things. We have state and local crimes that you find in a database. You have the sex offender crimes that you'll find in the sex offender registry. But then you're going to have the crimes against the U.S. or federal government or federal-related crimes. Now, a lot of people think of these as the white-collar criminals, white-collar crimes, the Bernie Madoffs, Martha Stewart crime where she got involved in the stocks. And those are true. Those are federal crimes, but interstate kidnapping is also a federal crime. Money laundering and racketeering is a federal crime too, or any crime in a federal building on federal lands. So a lot of organizations and a lot of companies completely neglect ordering a federal criminal search, and that can come back to bite them if they don't search it. So on top of the criminal, there's a lot of other things I mentioned, motor vehicle searches, I mentioned credit reports we can do. You can do the education verification. We can do international criminal and credit motor vehicles. We have 165 different services available to any organization, and most organizations look at about 5 that they need.
Yeah. So what are some of the training opportunities? Because there's a lot of things that can go out there, and I think part of the challenge is training nonprofit leaders or other people about what the benefits are and the dangers of neglecting to do due diligence. In other words, how can you what are the things that you're doing to assist people to understand the value of it so that they actually have this awareness? Because it's one thing to bring somebody in. Somebody could probably slide under the radar after you've done your search. Maybe something changes. So people need to have an idea what sort of things they need to look out for to make sure that everything is COPA. So what sort of training do you folks give nonprofits an opportunity to take advantage of so that they have a better sense of when they may need some help digging into something?
We actually have, that's a good question, Russell. We actually have a very specific training program that I actually founded, and it's called Safeguard from Abuse. Again, with a focus on the vulnerable populations that a lot of nonprofits focus their energy into those communities. It is a 75-minute online and also on a DVD training program with a certificate of understanding for those that pass the test on all the different types of abuse, not just the sexual abuse, but neglect, physical and emotional abuse, diving deep into what they are, diving deep into how to recognize when a child is being abused. And then, of course, so many organizations have that fear of having a sexual predator in their midst. So we do focus a little more time and attention in their personality traits, their grooming behaviors, in understanding the personality of that pedophile. And then really the most important thing is raising the awareness overall through the training, but empowering each person who goes through the video to be a mandated reporter and to understand that they can't help if they put their head in the sand. They have to be empowered to report, and understanding that they can and how to do so is very important. Now, the awareness training is important because my example that I like to use is, Russell, you want to buy a new car, and you got that brand of car in your mind, and you're now getting in your car and driving down the road. All of a sudden, you start to see that car everywhere. It's now in your awareness. They've always been there. Just like the characteristics of these people who harm kids, they're still doing it in front of us. We're just not aware of it. We didn't raise our awareness level high enough to see what's always been there, but invisible to the eye. So it's really what we focus on is what we see. And then what we focus on, we become as well, right? So we want to make sure that that we can train enough people to end child abuse, or at least if we can save one child, it's all worth it. So,
well, that's for sure. Every time you buy a new car, everybody buys the same make, model, and color that very same day, So, I was thinking about all of these things. And so there are people who are listening to this and they may be leaning back in their chairs thinking, I never did any of this stuff up front. And now I've got 60 people. How do I know that I don't have somebody like this in my midst right now? Is there some type of an organizational audit or assessment that you can do?
We can definitely help, but what you're saying is I got to go retro. I got to go back to day one and anybody who's still here with me and screen them. And that seems, again, like maybe an invasion, maybe a daunting task, or maybe you're just thinking, you know what, I'll just start with the next person. And now you're going to set yourself up for some difficulties about being fair and equitable. Because if it's just, Susan who just walked in the door, but you did not go back 5 years ago and do this, once you implement a strategy, you really have to just implement it at every level and go back and just do everybody. Starting top down is a good approach. Start at the top and push down through the hierarchy of individuals in the organization. But it's all about resetting the reason for why you're doing it. So you're kind of resetting the fact that you now have this new program that you're implementing. We have, our insurance company wants us to do it, and most insurance companies want you to do it anyway. But if you have to put it on something else, you can just say it's a new requirement, and it could be just your organization's requirement. But once it's a new requirement, it's a requirement. Everybody has to do it.
Well, yeah, having everybody do it ensures that you don't get somebody out there that wants to take you to court saying they're being singled out because, well, I'm a woman, or I'm black, or I'm over 50, or, just anything they can pull out to figure out why it doesn't apply. And so a lot of people, we talked about that comfort level that people have, I don't want to offend or put anybody out, but how do you help people who decide to do something like that do it in the face of the apprehension that they may have, and the fear of offending somebody, implementing it seamlessly? What are some of the things you do to help people through that?
Well, that's a good question. We actually help organizations put together a background screening policy, and it's all about policies. Sometimes you might have a policy for, with those that work with kids, you might have a child protection policy as an example. But even in that child protection policy, they don't talk about background checks. So we need to weave in another layer of policy, and that is, who do we screen? Why do we screen them? How often do we screen them? And what do we order? So it comes down to being comfortable enough with your organization and communicating that you do have policies, and it's part of your mission, it's part of your vision, wherever it is that it fits in, to make it that important. You can make it unimportant and be at risk and have everyone at risk, or you can make it important and be an advocate for safety and make your organization it's all about the image of that organization, amp up your image. And it's going to help you in the community.
You were talking about, both of you were talking about people not knowing what they don't know. I think there's a side of it where people are so close to it, they're blind, that you're so involved in it, and you're blind to it because you're focusing on the day-to-day and the relationships. So you're blind to all the liabilities. So there's, having someone like you that's skilled to discuss policy procedure with, I think is really a high benefit. Is that part of your service that you offer along with?
We offer that no charge, phone call conversations, anytime someone wants to talk to me.
Give people
it's very individual. Each organization is very individual. I can't just say, here's a template. But we like to discuss what your organization looks like, the different roles and responsibilities that you may have, the different silos that you may have, the different offshoots of your organization you may have, and then really start to drill down, because like I mentioned at one point, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Based on roles and responsibilities in the organization, you're going to be ordering different types of services. You may order a motor vehicle record for one, you may need to look at a credit report for one, but it won't be for all. So we want to make sure that you understand as an organization what's available, first of all, why you should order it, and then implement it. And now it's part of your policy manual, and now it can be handed off if you were to leave the organization. If you're in charge of this role and you're now leaving or retiring and going off to do something else, you can now hand it off to someone else and they don't have to reinvent the wheel. So it's important to do it on the front end, but we'll help.
Your the link for people to find you and find out about that is securesearch.com.
It's actually not, I wish I had that, but it's securesearchpro.com. securesearchpro.com.
Well, that's better.
We also have safeguardfromabuse.com for the
SAFEGUARD
safeguardfromabuse.com.
Maybe usc.com. I can think faster than I can type. So you've been talking about databases, and people go and do a database search. Say a little bit about more of people that don't know what you mean by a database. I think of a database is where I keep my CRM, where I keep my contacts. So say a little more about a database and why it doesn't really cut the mustard.
Okay, that's a good question. A lot of people think that there's one central place to go to do a background check in the United States. oh, just go to the FBI or just go. They think there's something in some place to go, but that's a fallacy. We are a disparate country. Our systems do not communicate with each other. What you have in Colorado doesn't communicate with what's in Virginia, doesn't communicate with what's in Florida, even though we think that's the case. Another fallacy is that a social security number is all you need to find a criminal record. We don't find any criminal records using a social security number. That's a myth. We use the social security number to find out who the person might be, what names they've used, what addresses they may have used through information sources. Now the databases, because we have this disparate system where counties don't communicate with states sometimes and counties don't even communicate with each other, all of these groups work in silos. And so their information or their data is also stuck in that silo. You have to go search that silo to find that information. Now, in some cases, these silos of information say, they raise their hand and say, I'll share my information. And so there are companies called data aggregators that go out and say, I'll pull from that county, I'll pull from that county, and this Department of Corrections wants to give me some information, and they compile it all together. Now they go out to my quote-unquote industry and say, hey, do you want to buy my information? And that's when I was talking about having 3 of these aggregators that I purchase data from and weave it all together, because they are going to miss some in one and miss some in another. I'm hoping that I can fill in some of the gaps. This is not 100%. Again, it's that net with holes. It's as good as it gets. We search over 1 billion records, but there are so many holes and gaps in this data that, and that's where the database comes in. It's a base of data. There are going to be so many holes that you can't rely on that as your only search. But we can, consult on the best approach. The best approach is really, you have to look at 3 different things. Your due diligence, why you do what you do, why you want to screen in the first place. Is it for workplace violence, to protect the vulnerable because your insurance company made you do it? I don't care what it is. We have to understand what the impetus of your diligence is. Then we need to look at your organizational budget and say, what budget dollars do we have to work with? Do you need to go find more budget dollars from another bucket in order to cover something like this? Because you really want to implement it as soon as possible. The third is your comfort for risk. Your comfort for risk, or your risk tolerance. And that is, are you comfortable with your organization name being in the newspaper because you didn't do a background check? And now you brought in a pedophile into your organization. Or does that make you cringe and keep you awake at night? And what does your legal counsel say? What does your insurance company say? We need to bring those 3 things together and come up with a unique and sustainable program for your organization. And it may be very different from the organization I talk to tomorrow. And that's okay. It's unique to you, and it's sustainable, and it's something you're comfortable with, and you can move forward with it in your organization.
I've actually met people that
think... That was a long answer for a simple question.
No, it's a complex question. Complex situation. I've actually met people that think they can just Google somebody's name and find out all kinds of things. What's the fallacy in that strategy?
Did you have consent to do it, first of all? Every applicant has their legal rights, and they have to provide you consent to really do a background check on them, especially if you want to use it. Now, if you just want to be the armchair neighbor and check on a neighbor, and you want to do some Googling, you have the legal right to do so. But if you're actually going to bring this individual on board and actually have them fill out paperwork to be a volunteer or member of the staff, you have to get their consent to do it. So you can't really just go to Google. And the data out there is only as good as the data out there. If you're not buying it and it's free, there's a reason it's free. If you're going out and spending $59.99 to get the rest of the report, they gave you a little carrot and the rest of it's behind the scenes, that's just database information, and that's way more than you ever need to pay. So you need to do a database search for under $15 because it's something that you need, but it's something you need to be able to build on, and you want to make sure that you make it affordable on the database side so that you can grow it and add the county courthouse searches as necessary.
Okay. And there are some things out there that are really robust, and I probably use some of the same things as a revenue agent for IRS. So there is stuff that's really robust, but it's not off the shelf. It's not cheap by any means. So, but it's really good stuff, and it's important to do that. You get what you pay for, and a lot of these databases that you've described will pop up if you're doing an online directory search for an online Yellow Pages or something. Like these things get offered to you all the time. And so
it's really the free data that's available to everyone that they compilate, but it's all the free stuff. And not everything's going to be in there, as I mentioned. It's going to be fraught with holes. So they make it look good. They put a real shiny website together, and you see little moving parts, and it looks like, my goodness, they're searching as deep as they can go, and I'm going to get every little tidbit of information I need in seconds on one of these companies. And they're really not employment compliant, so you have to be very careful with what they do. Everything needs to be validated at the local level. Anything from a database, any red flag, actually has to be validated at the court or the point of origin of the information to be accurate. Otherwise, you're not supposed to see it anyway. So that's why you want to work with a consumer reporting agency. Secure Search is a consumer reporting agency. And we're actually a member of Concerned consumer reporting agencies, making sure we do it the right way, and we do validate everything at the local level before you as a customer gets to see that information.
We're coming to the last part of our interview, Steve. I want to ask you, it's securesearchpro.com is where people can find out more. What is the differentiator? What makes this business different? You mentioned there were lots of others out there. So why are you different from them?
That's a really good question. And the first thing is the information that we have to share with you is through years of experience. So we have veterans in the industry on staff that run our customer service department, that run our operations, and that are running in the executive office. We're veterans in the industry. So that's number one, lots of experience. Number two is we really have a heart for the nonprofit sector, because we understand that you're wearing many hats and that you don't have time, and you may not even have the skill sets like a human resource person on staff. So you can actually feel comfortable with us. We are going to answer the phone. We're going to talk to you. You're not going to be alone in this process. We're going to be there to answer any question you may have throughout the process, and you're going to have someone you can work with. Whether it be me, you can always work with me directly, or anyone on my staff. We also don't have a single salesperson on staff, so you'll never be, quote unquote, sold anything. We only have consultants. So anytime we talk to you, it's going to be asking you questions. We're going to make recommendations for best practices, and you're not going to hear from us 5 million times. We're not going to pound you till you buy type of thing. We actually just wait to hear from you again if you'd like to do business with us. And really, that's what makes us different. We have a heart for the nonprofit. We have incredibly, the integrity of our data that we're purchasing, and the integrity of our system that we have, and the compliance of our system and our processes are really what sets us apart.
That's really strong. We have a number of people watching us on Facebook. You may have met Joyce last week at CO Space. She just joined us, Joyce White Nelson, who lives in Florida. And Tina is there. So Steve, think about I'm going to give a sponsor message here for a minute, but when I come back, think of the final challenge, the final tip, or the final thought that you would like to leave people with from this interview. Before we do that, it sounds like this service is incredibly expensive, thousands of dollars to do a background check. Is that true?
No, that's actually very far from true. Depends on the organization you're working with. Our pricing model is geared towards the nonprofit sector. So our pricing is going to be extremely affordable, and we actually have scalable pricing for those that have high volume, volume discount programs as well. But a background check, I would say that a good budget, if you want to do it right for the criminal and sex offender and fill in all the gaps, is budget for $50 a person. Doesn't mean it's always going to cost $50 a person. It could cost $15 for some and $22 for another, and it could be $85 for another. It could be all over the board, but I would budget that just to make sure you have enough allocated funds for a good, solid program. A lot of people are going to ask about, do I need to do background checks through the fingerprint process too? No, you don't. You can actually get really good information that is, disposition-based information. Disposition is what happened in court. Information from secure search without ever having to fingerprint. If you're getting government funding and you're getting state funding or you're working with one of those programs, they may make it mandatory and then you have to do it. But we can still make sure that the fingerprint arrest record, and that's all it is an arrest information source with a biometric, and not everybody gets fingerprinted when they get arrested, but we can make sure that the courts dismissed it or said it was a guilty verdict and kind of enhance the arrest record database that you search if you fingerprint it.
Good, good. Thank you for that complete answer. Think about your parting comment, and I want to mention our sponsor today is a company called WordSprint, like fast, wordsprint.com. Bill Gilmer presented at our CenterVision Leadership Empowerment Symposium last week in Lynchburg, and just last couple of days I've heard from people say, wow, he really knows how to keep donors donating, how to keep customers active. So Bill and his team know how to have a donor management program where 30% is the message, 30% is the right person, and 30% is a rhythm of the communication. And only 10% is the appearance of it. So over decades, Bill has done research in how do we stay in touch. It's called top of mind marketing. Bill Gilmer prints nonprofit Performance 360 magazine and helps us, as CenterVision, helps us stay in touch with our tribe. So if you want a free consultation, Bill is happy to share about his research and show you how every single nonprofit he works with climbs the scale as far as donor consistency and the amounts that donors donate to keep it going. Let's keep them informed and let's work on relationship. Wordsprint.com, and find the link there for a free consultation. So this has been a very informative interview, and I'm just sitting here thinking about all the organizations that I know about that have fallen short. And so we're going to make sure that we put a recommendation in our work that they do this early on. So I think it's that important. So as we're tying up this really good interview, and Steve, thank you for the time today. It's been exceptional. What do you want to leave? What impression, what challenge, what thought do you want to leave in people's mind?
I guess my question is, what image do you have of your own organization? How do you look at your own organization, and does your process and your people align with it? If you're worried about that and you want to lower your risk and lower your liabilities as an organization and maintain your image in the community, or maintain the image that you want to have of your organization, it doesn't cost a lot of money. It doesn't take a lot of time. You don't have to learn how to do it. We do everything for you. Just reach out to us. There's no charge to sign up. There's no charge for a free consultation, of course. So call, talk to one of our advocates. We're here to help. We're not here to sell. So we hope to hear from you, whether you email us or phone us. It's something that you should definitely take a look at. Whether you're doing the background checks now, we can talk about whether you're doing them the right way. If you're not doing them, we can help you along the path.
Russell, thanks again for being here and being by my side. And Steve, thank you for a wonderful interview. And
thank you, Hugh.
Thanks everyone for listening.